It's our pleasure to meet with you this morning. I've already enjoyed a lot of your efforts in the playing and the listening. And our realm is orchestral more than university and conservatory. And for that, we've been asked to just say a few words about finding a job and how one goes about that. Because when Marlene and I were first players orchestrally, it was a different scene really from now. We didn't have 450 applicants for every position. We had maybe only 150. And so our chances somehow seemed not as daunting as they are now. So we have to try to give you an idea of what it is that's valued and what you could be doing if orchestral activity is what you'd like to do, what you could do to be able to get there. So would you like to say anything else with that, Martin?
Well, what comes to mind immediately when you're thinking of doing an audition is that your rhythm has to be absolutely solid. It has to be incredible. I mean, you can reveal your personality in the audition, but it has to be within very, very solid rhythm, because everybody listening to you on that committee has played the pieces that you're auditioning on hundreds of times, and they know exactly what is going on in the orchestra, and they're hearing it in their head as you're playing. And if you futz with the rhythm, they'll say next. So rhythm is really, really crucial. I've been on many audition panels, and I can promise you that it is the most difficult thing for the auditioning clarinetist to, I mean, you just have to be so stellar with your rhythm. The reason it's so difficult, of course, is because we all have different heartbeats, we walk at different paces, so we all have a different sort of rhythmic feel in our body. But when you are in that audition, you just have to be hearing everything that's going on. Beethoven 6, for example, the slow movement. You have to know what the horns have during that clarinet solo. You better know exactly what they have and be able to fit what you're doing within that. So rhythm is really crucial.
In my time, I grew up in Ohio, well, studied in Ohio, and George Zell was in the Cleveland Orchestra, the music director then. And he said, and then he told Marcellus, of course, who was my second teacher, that rhythm for him was the first essential. If a person didn't have the good rhythm, they were simply gone. And so absolutely what Marlene says is true in that respect, because somehow you can't teach rhythm. You don't want to have to teach rhythm. You can teach phrasing, and you can teach sound, and you can teach other aspects of personality in your playing, but you really shouldn't have to deal with rhythm. So, and that's why pieces like Firebird are on auditions, because they reveal in about a minute and a half how you count. In the Debussy Rhapsody that you heard this morning, the triplets, ba, da, da, dee, just the subdivision of something like that and playing them perfectly, like you heard, really makes it work for us. What other essentials?
I think in your preparation, make sure you play for many, many people before you go to the actual audition. I mean, knock on people's doors if you have to. I mean, play for as many different audiences as you can, because when you're backstage waiting to come on for your 5 or 10 minutes, I mean, you just have to be, as Caroline says, spot on, you know, when you're out there. So getting as many different experiences playing for people before you actually take the audition is really crucial.
And that's true because any committee is made up not only of clarinet players, but of flutists and oboists and bassoonists. And in my experience, when there are committees that are diverse like that, the flute players always hear things differently. They're almost always at odds with the way the reed players hear things. And that's a big problem for us sometimes, that we get into discussions about things we don't want to discuss because of them. So if you could play for flutists, when Jeff Zook, who's our piccolo player and a really good player and teacher, as many of you know, won our piccolo job in Detroit, he came and played for me before, just to have another instrument listening to what we are hearing instead of just what a flutist or his teacher might have been hearing.
Absolutely true. When I was conducting in Rochester, New York, about a month ago, and the bass player came up to me and she said, "I'm going to take an audition. Will you listen to me play my audition stuff?" And I thought to myself, why is she asking me? She knew I was a clarinetist. I suppose it's because I was the conductor, but she asked me to listen to her stuff, and I wondered why. But I did hear many, many things that no one had said to her before, because she was playing for some bass players and other string players, and I was a different perspective, and I think it was helpful to her. So yeah, play for as many different kinds of people as you can.
Caroline?
I have a question, Ted, well, to Marlene too, but maybe, could you tell us a little bit, I know recently in the Detroit Symphony you hired a bass clarinetist just this season, right?
Yes.
And can you tell them a little bit about the procedure and how it all ended up, how many you had, these kinds of things?
Yeah, sure. We had a gentleman named Ollie Green who had been in the orchestra since 1948 and just retired last year. We still have a person in the violin section who joined in 1943. So he's been there 64 years, and which means he's in his 80s and some, significantly more. So with the bass clarinets, we had applications of perhaps 170 or so, and we did not weed people out. We try not to do that if at all possible. Although the Chicago job that's coming up soon, Larry Combs' job, they of course have to have CDs submitted, DVDs submitted, and limit the number of people who would come. But for the bass job, we had only 65 who came, which was surprising to us, because that is a huge job. And for somebody who loves the bass clarinet, that's their life. We heard preliminary rounds and had a list actually of primarily well, both instruments. It was interesting because the Minnesota Orchestra had their audition for a bass clarinet job 2 weeks before ours. And that list, which Marlene probably has also seen, had almost all bass clarinet things on it, and maybe 2 or clarinet excerpts, 2 or 3, hardly any, which was not what we wanted, because we have a situation where we like to have 4 players who play clarinet well, so that when we have just Beethoven symphonies and Brahms symphonies, we can revolve 4 people and have different times to play pieces rather than just 3, and having a person who plays only bass. So we had a list that was equally difficult for both instruments, and therein lies a problem for an aspiring bass clarinetist, because so often bass clarinet players, in the past at least, didn't play clarinet very well. They kind of focused, they may have learned on bass so that all their oral cavity and the way they play the instrument is more designed for bass. And then when they go to play clarinet, they don't have a separate embouchure for it. Like Eddie Daniels, who was in Detroit last night, plays clarinet great, as all of you know. And he plays saxophone great, but he has 2 entirely different personas for those 2. Different embouchures, different everything. And so we wanted somebody who played 2 clarinets, bass and clarinet, really well. And that, right away, we put on the list Le Coq d'Or, the descending cadenza from Le Coq d'Or by Rimsky-Korsakov, which is one of the hardest clarinet excerpts that one usually encounters. And I think when that got put on there, that kind of kept a few people from coming. Because people just didn't want to be embarrassed by not being able to play it. And either you can sort of play it or it just comes all apart, and it's not fun to be part of that. So in that sense, we had the prelims and then semifinal rounds. And we heard, as I've mentioned to Dr. Hardy before, only maybe 5 or 6 of those 65 who sounded like they were bass clarinetists, who weren't people who took up bass and played it sort of. And those 5 or 6, of course, were wonderful to listen to. And of those 5 or 6, after the semifinal round, there were really only 2 who played with good sounds and who played with technical ease on both instruments. And so they were invited to a final round in September. And all of our auditions are totally blind, totally. We don't know. In fact, we can't even discuss if they're 17 years old or if they have experience, like in the Milwaukee Symphony or something like that. We can't know anything. And so it was totally blind and totally fair. And one person had the most gorgeous sound on both instruments and played perfectly technically, played with beautiful sensitivity, and some of the solos, like in Bartok, and things that were really internally enriching solos. And that person, for the reed players, won the audition. But the flute players tended to hear in the other person's playing something that they liked. And I don't know how, I just can't understand it. But therein lies that problem. So we fortunately had a committee and a conductor, Peter Unjen, who's music director of the Toronto Symphony, who is our musical advisor until we hire a music director, which we just did a couple weeks ago, Leonard Slatkin. But so Peter was at the auditions, Peter Unjen, and he was so perfect. He's former violinist to the Tokyo Quartet, and he's very musical. And he heard what we heard, fortunately, and was just as strongly in favor of the person we ended up hiring, whose name is Shannon Orm, who went to Northwestern and to USC and then played in Japan before this. So, Dr. Harding, can you think of any other aspects of that audition that you'd want us to have mentioned?
No, I think that's excellent, and I think that's exciting for them to hear the procedure and the fact that somebody was in the orchestra. I mean, they filled a slot that had been, since 1948, he's been in the orchestra. So it shows how competitive it is, and that's why you want to start practicing this afternoon. Right now.
No, at lunchtime.
I was thinking, Marlene, I'd like to maybe talk a little bit about, I'd like you to talk about your path as how you found your way to what you're doing now, and she's going to be doing some of that this afternoon as a conductor too.
I played in the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra for 22 years, but for about 10 of those years, the last 10, this yearning and this dream of mine to conduct was surfacing more and more. I was trying to push it down and push it out of the way because I was very fearful of entering into the world of conducting, because there I was sitting watching conductors all the time, hating almost all of them. And why would I ever go to the dark side, as my friends tell me about? But the thing about dreams for yourself is that they are yours only, no one else's. And if you don't follow them, it's like committing spiritual suicide, I swear. And this dream of mine would not go away, would not. And so I've always conducted, but it's always been adjunct to my clarinet playing. I've always found myself in a conductor role. Even in playing in chamber music, I end up kind of being the leader of the chamber music. Anyway, I finally took the leap, and it's working, and I love it. It's not easy, but boy, is my life colorful now. You know, I had played Beethoven second in the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra probably, too many times to count, over 100 times. And it had become gray for me, playing, because I played second clarinet, and it had become very, I was still happy, but life was gray. And as conductor now, life is certainly not gray, it's very colorful. I'm still scared to death to step on the podium in front of every orchestra. It's still a daunting thing to put myself into, and I ask myself many times, what are you thinking? Why are you doing this? Because I have such anxiety the weeks before. Because you cannot prepare enough. You can never prepare enough as clarinetist or as conductor. There is so much you must know as conductor, and you cannot know it all, no matter how much you study, and the musicians know that. And so if you're a musician though, if you are a really fine musician, they recognize that. And they will put up with a lot of mistakes here if your heart and your soul as a musician comes through. Wouldn't you agree, watching conductors on the podium?
Yeah.
I mean, we've all seen a lot of really terrible conductors, but most of the time they're terrible because their music isn't there, So that's my path.
Very, very interesting.
So you went to two good universities.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And as you won St. Paul and won that job, what preceded that allowed you to win that?
I came in through the back door, actually. I was. This is a bit of advice to all of you. Be proactive. for yourself, on your own behalf. Nobody else is going to do it for you. People aren't going to knock on your door. So be proactive, and here's an example of my being proactive. I was in St. Paul. I was back home from, I had been teaching at Crane School of Music in Potsdam, New York. And I was home, and Tim Paradise, who's principal clarinet in the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, was playing Bartok contrasts at a little venue. And he was playing with the concertmaster and the conductor at the time. And Tim Paradise made a big blunder. He got lost in Bartok contrasts. They had to stop, and they had to tell each other, start at letter S, or whatever it was. Anyway, that's sort of prelude to what his mood was when I went up to him afterwards. I'd never met the guy. But I wanted to introduce myself, and I wanted him to give me some coaching. So I went up to him afterwards, and it took a lot of guts for me to even go up to him. It doesn't appear right here that I'm kind of shy, but I'm kind of a shy person. But I got my resolve, and I went up to him and I said, hello, I'm Marlene Pauley, great playing, and I would love it if I could come and play for you. And he said, no, I don't take any students. And I said, but I just premiered this concerto. I've finished my master's degree with Elsa Ludwig Verder. I really want to play for you. Sorry, I don't take any students. He was so crabby. And I said, but I really, really want you to give me a lesson. He said, okay, call me tomorrow. I mean, I wore him down. But that's how, when you want something, when your dream is really, really, when what you believe about yourself is, I mean, it's what you want for yourself, dare to be proactive. So I went and played for him. Then I was teaching at Arkansas State University, and he called me because I had been proactive, because I had played for him, because he had worked with me. I was teaching at Arkansas State University. I get this call. It's Tim Paradise. Can you come up and play for Pinchas Zuckerman? We are going on a South American tour, and our second clarinetist isn't able to go. But you have to come up and audition for Pinky Zuckerman first. So my hand is just shaking. You know? I'll come. So I went up and I auditioned for Pinky Zuckerman, and I went to South America, and then I got the job after that. I didn't go through this audition procedure. I mean, I played for Pinky, that was an audition, but it wasn't like what you did. So there are many, many ways to get into orchestral playing, and if you are proactive, and if you practice, you know, you can do it.
What in your early playing set you on the right track? I mean, what should these younger players be doing? Finding a good teacher, and then how do they get good from say, in 6th grade or 8th grade? What should they be doing that maybe they aren't?
Oh, well, we'll both answer that.
Okay, go for it.
You know, Elsa was huge in my life, and I think I gained a lot of confidence under her tutelage, and she modeled for me being a clarinetist, being a woman, being a person with confidence, and so it was a fantastic place for me to be here, because you can't achieve any success unless you believe in yourself. So that's first and foremost. But in terms of technical ability, because you play a wind instrument, you can never, ever, ever be using enough air. I mean, if you think you're blowing hard enough, think again, because it's never enough. So air is the most important thing. So hopefully you all have teachers who nurture that and get you to put air through the horn all the time. I think rhythm is a really important thing. Why don't you take this?
And just from my own experience, I was young and I had some ability, and that showed, but I had teachers who didn't know how to make a sound that's nice on the clarinet. So I grew up in long time ago and didn't know anything, and I had to learn it over many years. When I was still getting postgraduate in college, I still had an okay sound, but nothing special. And so I've come kind of from one of the worst sounds to one of the maybe better sounds, and it's just by perseverance. For one thing, when you're young, you've just got to get a good teacher. You somehow have to find out in your city, wherever you live, who really knows how to teach. Not just be comfortable and stay with the teacher you've been with for a while, even because it's so hard to say goodbye to a teacher, because so often teachers are possessive and make you feel really bad having to change to somebody else. And we as teachers, all of us, know how much we encourage our students to go on to another person. And we're so happy for them when they can go on to somebody else and not just keep our clutches on them. So if you can make sure you have the best teachers, and then start listening. Listening to things that excite you. For me, it was orchestral things. In Tucson, Arizona, there was nothing 50 years ago. And we had a good library with good records. And so I listened and got excited about some of the things I heard orchestrally. Rite of Spring was the first thing I heard. That's pretty easy to get excited about. But then to try to listen more and more and decide what you want to do. I ask performance majors sometimes what they'd really like to do. And they have a very broad cross-section of what they'd love to do. But maybe to try to figure out what you really would most love to do, like Marlene has done, in deciding that she wanted most of all to conduct and to lead and to inspire and to teach. And that's what makes a difference to her. And if you can kind of figure out for yourself early as possible what you want to do, and then listen to things that are in that realm, that can really help you. Certainly to put yourself in a competitive atmosphere, like going to a great school like this, to where you have others who are working as hard as you are, or maybe harder, and kind of shaming you into not practicing on Saturday. I walked over to the music practice building this morning, where I have a place I teach, and there wasn't one sound in the practice rooms at 8:15 in the morning. And I was surprised, because there are always people who are so keen that they are there working all the time and want to get, as good as they can be. I was surprised. So it's interesting that, well, they're all involved here in the clarinet day, of course, so they couldn't be over there practicing. But there were no pianists, and there were no violinists. And that was surprising. So you just have to work so hard, harder than you ever think you should. And you can't be comfortable, because here you are at this great school and you have great programs here, but you can't just go through the motions and get good grades and practice and do good juries and do good recitals, because you've got to be demanding more of yourself than that. You've got to be thinking down the line as to how close you are to your Waterloo. And that comes sooner than many of you think. We know from being teachers that neurologically, the way we are developed, we learn best up to the age of 17. And that's the date at which things start to go downhill. So, amazingly. Now that's shocking, because most of us are past that. But if you can gain as much as you can before 17, that's when you learn quickest and fastest, and it's absorbed best by your brain and by your hands and your mind. So after that, you have to really hustle to make the improvements. They don't come easily. Yeah. I'm sure Marlene would agree that if she and I were just to take up a piece like Curliano or something at our age and tackle it, it would be not as easy as for you to tackle it at your ages. You'd probably learn it quicker than we would. And that's not a good feeling. So it's much better to be young and find it easy to learn than to try it later on and find out that you can't. And then you've just got to persevere. You've got to take the auditions, and like we heard earlier from Dr. Hardig, and from some other people, you've got to learn how to accept losses. Marlene and I probably auditioned for things that we didn't get, and yet we kept going. In fact, there's one really good example. John Ferrillo, the oboist, you've heard about this. John Ferrillo was an oboist who went to Curtis, studied with John Delancey. Okay, anybody who goes to Curtis usually gets a job, right? Because that's 4 people out of the whole school that are accepted. So those people are usually quite extraordinary. He came out of Curtis and took auditions. And he took 5 auditions. He took 10. He kept taking auditions, 20. He took 30 and nothing. He took until his 37th audition did he get offered anything, a job. He auditioned even in Winnipeg which was a very good orchestra, but still, it's Winnipeg, it's not New York. He auditioned for second oboe in Winnipeg, and he did not get the job. So in his 37th audition, he won the principal oboe of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, playing for James Levine every day. And so he could have given up, but he didn't. He just kept at it and at it and at it. And then when James Levine, well, he won the principal oboe job then in the Boston Symphony, where he's again with James Levine. He's one of the most extraordinary oboists in this country. So 37 losses. How many of you could bear up to that? Who could? I think that would be hard. You'd start thinking about career changes and maybe doing something differently. So if you can make sure that you have that steel rod inside of you that drives you, or Mr. Marcellus used to talk about it, the flame that burns within you. You just have to have that burning desire. You have to want it more than any of your friends do who are just comfortable, They're just going through the motions and they're doing a good job. So.
Yeah, when I was in high school, what I knew was that I loved playing the clarinet. And I craved exposure to music and musicians. That's what I knew. But I sure did not know that I could make a living playing the clarinet. I didn't believe I could make a living playing the clarinet. I didn't have a clue. I thought everybody else in the world was far better than I. But I loved doing it, which I think carried me forward. And then in college, I ended up sort of rising to the top of the heap, but I still didn't really believe that could I make a living playing the clarinet? It really wasn't until graduate school that I really got it, that maybe I could do it. So I think holding tenaciously to what you believe for yourself, holding on to it, and don't let anybody put an obstacle in your path. And if you're meant to play the clarinet, you will play the clarinet if you just continue believing in yourself. Like I said, nobody's going to open the door for you. You're going to have to kick those doors down. Yeah. So, do you have any questions?
How does a student decide when it's time to upgrade their instrument? What should they look at when it's time to do that?
It's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so many families don't have the means, so perhaps as a teacher I don't even get into that, because some of the immigrant families that I have some exposure to the kids, they just can't consider it, and I don't want to put pressure on them and make their lives more unhappy than they already are. So then in those cases we try to try to find used instruments for them that are a step above, and certainly to try to get them off the plastic clarinets if possible and into something that has some sound, nice sound in it. Dr. Hardy, would you have any suggestions in that regard?
Well, I agree with you. The most important thing is to try to get off the plastic. But if you can, get a wooden instrument and, look at, sometimes there's intermediate grade instruments, like on the Fed there's an E11, which is just a step under the R13. But if you think your student or your son or daughter is very interested in majoring in music, then maybe when they're a sophomore or junior, if you do have the means, try to get them a professional line instrument, because it's not that much more in increase in price, and it'll serve you well in the long run. But and also mouthpiece.
Mouthpiece is everything.
Mouthpiece is everything. I've seen kids come to auditions and they say, I got this brand new buffet clarinet. And then I say, what mouthpiece are you playing? And they say, oh, the one that came with it.
Yeah.
That's a little word, right, also? Yeah, that's what would be a little word. So the mouthpiece is really important too. That's key, and a good ligature. So you can't stress that enough, right, guys?
And of course, that's where the good teacher,
Yeah.
hopefully that the student has a good teacher, can tell them exactly what they should do and when. But you need the good teacher. There aren't very many. Golly, in Detroit there may be a handful of people who really know how to help the students. And so you've just got to find those people, whoever they are.
And then when you get in the clarinet, I remember in high school I got my first buffet, right? And I was in the marching band, I realized I couldn't take it out there. So then you play glockenspiel, and that's what
I did too, yeah. Play glockenspiel.
Walking down the street, and there were cars parked, and I was banging away, and I
Good movement.
That's right.
Other questions? Yes.
How does someone find out about openings in different symphonies, and what actually do, I know you probably play different things, different, I guess, different orchestras, whatever, but what is a typical audition require, solo, but
A list?
solos, but
Yeah.
scales or things like that, or how are they different from, bands?
Well, first of all, does the College Music Society have always the university positions listed?
It has all the university positions.
Yeah.
And the Chronicle of Higher Education.
Mhm.
Then for orchestra, usually it's the international position.
You have to belong to the union
Right.
to get the magazine.
But now online, there's so many postings that there are people who post all the jobs. I mean, I don't know what those sites are, but some of you probably referenced it. Yes? So that is, and then beyond that, then I think that for auditions, typically scales would probably not be required for service bands or certainly for orchestral things. Then there's a basic type of repertoire that you can get an idea about just from the orchestral excerpt books that are put out for different instruments, because obviously they put in there the things that people have to play. So that's a good guide about how to do that.
But it would be good for us to give a list to interested people of what is on that list.
Mhm.
So Beethoven 6, always. Beethoven 8, Minuet and Trio.
Beethoven 4.
Beethoven 4, for sure, slow movement. Firebird, Coq d'Or. Mozart Concerto, always, right?
Yes, almost always.
Always.
Yeah, because
Always.
it shows everything within about a minute and a
Yeah,
half.
right.
Yeah.
Right. What else would be on the list, Ted?
Well, Brahms third,
Uh-huh.
for sure, probably. Capriccio Spagnolo, possibly, just for the first movement, which with the trills and rhythm, getting the rhythm of the short notes right is really revealing. And then for technical things, it could be the Ginastera Variaciones Concertantes, which is a recent addition to orchestral repertoire, but that has a separate solo variation for each instrument, and that is often not in excerpt books, but that is an essential. Coq d'Or, Marlene mentioned, Shostakovich Ninth, which has a quick third movement and a very beautiful second movement that goes up to a high F sharp. That shows a lot. Let's see, Shostakovich 1 for personality, because it has such good solos, and each one of them has a different kind of character to it.
Rachmaninoff 2.
Rachmaninoff 2 always, because although it's hard to ask it on an audition because it takes over 2 minutes to listen through it, and if you only have 6 minutes or 8 minutes per person, that's a big chunk. In a semifinal round, it'll often get put there because if that's sustaining a long melodious thing and having enough colors and enough something in your playing to make it compelling and make it gripping and not just static. That's there. Let's see, what else?
Galanta.
For sure, Galanta, first page or last page, because it's a gypsy piece, and clarinet and gypsy music just, like this, the Hungarians and the Romanians, the best clarinet playing, the most free, wonderful, and klezmer in a sense. Those just wild uses of the clarinet are just so wonderful. And Galanta has it written out, and it's hard. It's hard to bring it off effectively.
Do you single tongue all the 16th notes in that?
No. Do you?
No, I cheat a little bit.
We didn't grow up at a time where it was really mandatory to learn to double tongue. But for you, it's really mandatory. You have to learn to circular breathe, as you saw from Greg Oakes today. What a wonderful demonstration. I hope you all noticed when that was going on. I've never actually seen anybody do it that vividly, for that long a time. In Curliana, you have to catch it here and catch it there and help yourself out. But that was really interesting to see how well it can be done. Because if I'd been listening, I don't think I would have heard that. Would you have heard that?
No.
If you hadn't seen it going on?
Right.
I don't think from the
Couldn't
sound.
tell.
When you really couldn't tell. Once you saw it happening, then you could hear a slight change in the color of the sound when it was happening, but you'd never pick it up. And double tonguing is an absolute now. The way things are being written now, Curliano, you couldn't play Curliano, I don't think, and without some kind of real ability to articulate into circular breathe. So, good questions.
Any other questions?
I would only just suggest to you, doing something that Marlene has done. And that is that one of my students, actually one of the students who was here at Michigan State, Marianne Leach, from maybe about 8 years ago, 10 years ago, she studied with Professor L when she was here, I think, probably because she couldn't get in Dr. Verdeer's class. But she was a student who did really, really well and went to Cincinnati then and did a grad degree there and had some contact with Yehuda Gilad at USC. And in Cincinnati, she owns a couple restaurants and she plays clarinet still in a woodwind trio. And she was trying to decide what to do with her life, and she spent time with Yehuda at USC, and he suggested that she just find a path for herself, because he said there aren't very many performing positions available anymore. Gosh, some years there are 2 or 3 auditions total for this country of 300 million people. And he suggested that woodwind trio, that she go with that, and she has done that. And in Cincinnati, it's being really successful, and she's happy. She's had a chance to go and do something else someplace else, and she doesn't want to give up the trio. She likes the people. They're as active as they want to be, and that was find a path. Find something to do musically that you can do and that you love to do, like Marlene did, in finding that.
Yeah, and if you love to do it, you will be successful because you love it, and you'll make plenty of money. You will. If you do what you love, you will make plenty of money. I promise.
That's a good ending note.
Good.
Are there any other questions for these 2 fine professionals out there in the field? Anybody else?
I'm wondering about audition preparation as far as what kinds of steps do you take as far as maybe recording yourselves, and what you're saying is meant for as many people as possible?
It's a really good thing. Dr. Hardig and I spoke about this too, about the fact that the prevalence of CDs now being required, that you submit. For Minnesota, they required a CD. We did not. Chicago does. Many orchestras do now. And for summer music camps, you need to prepare CDs. And you know, we as faculty and we as people who hear we can hear the editings, you know, and things. We know who's done what and who's edited, and so you have to become really good at learning the material so you can actually play it and not rely on somebody in the sound room to make you sound really good. So therefore, New World Symphony, for instance, and we in Aspen, well, not yet, but next year probably, New World requires DVDs of your playing, which is really helpful to us. Not just to scrutinize how much cutting you did or anything, because it's much harder to edit a DVD when you're in the middle of a solo and your body movement is different, etc. But we want to see what you look like when you've seen these great artists play, when you see Dr. Verdeer play, when you see Dr. Hardig play. They are interesting visually to watch because it shows everything about what they are. And when we see a candidate applying for something and you can see them play, it really is helpful to us to see if they seem to have what you're looking for in a total person who's very musical possibly and who's communicative, who will be able to make you listen to them. So in that sense, for auditions, that's what you probably would want to think in terms of, about learning the stuff so well you can actually make good CDs, and then maybe making them effective so that they come off the page, so people can hear musicality in them rather than just correct notes. Were you thinking of something slightly different from that? About that, like that? Mm-hmm.
And listen to as many different recordings as you can.
And of yourself.
Yeah.
Because how many of us record ourselves on an irregular basis? Maybe half of you, maybe fewer. That's good if you do, because if you hear what you sound like, you often will really not like it. I mean, I'm in that position. I cannot. I just don't like to listen because I never think it's right. And I think that if you scrutinize yourself through life like that look at how these people play, look how Dr. Verdeer plays, and look how Dr. Hardig plays, and we, if we were playing, that it's because we are always our own worst critics. We hear everything we do, and nothing ever gets past us, and that's why we are still functioning at this age and doing well, because we are so critical of our own playing. And so you as students should be the same.
And be grateful you have that critic in your head. Don't try to get rid of it. Sometimes it is such a saboteur. And sometimes you just wonder, what the heck, why do I have this awful voice in my head saying that I am not worth anything? It is part of your arsenal of tools to get better. View it that way. And let it have its say. Don't fight with it, just hear it, you know? And I think creativity of any kind is such an aggressive act because we're all such individuals, and so our individual creativity is not going to be agreed with by many people who hear it. So creativity being such an aggressive act, you dare to put it out there, and there will be critics. So that's why the critic inside is so vital to us all, because it doesn't allow us to put stuff out there unless it's pretty darn good first. And then once it's out there, then just be ready. Be ready. Because there will be critics. Don't answer them, but just know that they'll be there. They're always there. Always. Blah, 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 blah.
Anything else? Well, thank you for
Thanks,
this opportunity.
everyone.
Thank you for
Thanks.
coming. Because this realm is, of music making has such a rich literature, you know, for the soloist and all. But the orchestral realm is so much more limited in a way. You know, we have 30 pieces that you should know for orchestral auditions. 30. Where would that take you as a solo performer in your lives? How many pieces has Dr. Verdere played in her life? And Dr. Hardick? I mean, ours is such a simple route. So thank you for coming and letting us talk about our path, which
Yeah.
is just so different from most of your paths.
Well, thank you.